Somewhere in the Persian Gulf right now, mounted on the deck of a single United States Navy destroyer, there's a weapon that doesn't fire a bullet, doesn't fire a missile, and makes almost no sound at all when it engages a target. According to multiple independent defense outlets, that weapon has already been used in actual combat against Iranian drones during this war. If that sounds like something out of a movie, understand this isn't speculation dressed up for a headline. This is a real name system, deployed on a real ship, tested for over a decade in these exact waters, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why Iran's entire drone strategy may already be running into a wall it was never designed to face. The weapon is called Helios, high-energy laser with integrated optical-dazzler and surveillance. Fittingly, Helios is also the name of the Greek god of the sun, according to reporting from Euronews, and whoever picked that name understood exactly what they were building. According to the Defense News, dated March 5th, 2026, the U.S. Navy deployed Helios aboard an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in waters near Iran as part of the ongoing military campaign known as Operation Epic Fury. Footage released by U.S. Central Command shows that destroyer in the operational theater with the system mounted near the forward section of the ship, aimed at the same airspace where Iran has launched hundreds of drones and missiles throughout this conflict. Now let's talk about which ship this actually is, because that detail matters more than most coverage gives it credit for. According to Interesting Engineering and confirmed independently by Next Big Future's tracking of this conflict, the vessel is the USS Preble, hull number DDG-88, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. And here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. As of the most recent reporting, the USS Preble is the only ship in the entire United States Navy currently equipped with the full Helios system. One ship, sitting off the coast of Iran in the middle of an active war, carrying a capability that doesn't exist anywhere else in the fleet yet. Let's rewind and understand exactly how long this technology has been in development, because this isn't something rushed into service because of this war. It goes back to January 2018, according to IEEE Spectrum's reporting on the original contract, when Lockheed Martin won the deal to build this exact laser system for an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, with delivery targeted for fiscal year 2020. That contract, according to that same reporting, included options worth up to $942.8 million for training, maintenance, and support, and additional laser units down the line. This was a long-term, heavily funded program from the very beginning, not a wartime shortcut. By 2022, according to Interesting Engineering's reporting, Helios had been physically integrated onto the USS Preble, meaning Navy technicians had connected the laser and its control systems directly into the ship's power, cooling, and battle management architecture. That integration step matters enormously because an earlier experimental laser system from years before, called Laos, tested aboard the USS Ponce, was never fully integrated with a ship's onboard systems the way Helios now is. In plain terms, this isn't a science experiment bolted onto a warship for demonstration purposes. It's wired directly into how the ship fights. The testing history tells the same story of patient, methodical progress. According to a report from the Defense Post, citing the Pentagon's own Director of Operational Test and Evaluation annual report, USS Preble successfully engaged a single surrogate drone target during a sea trial sometime during fiscal year 2024, with the exact location and date kept classified. That was the first confirmed proof the integrated system worked in a real operational environment, not just on a test range. Then, according to Interesting Engineering's more recent reporting, the test expanded significantly. During a Navy-operated counter-drone exercise described as taking place last year, USS Preble successfully neutralized 4 separate uncrewed aerial vehicles in a single engagement. 4 for 4. That test marked a real step forward because it moved beyond single-target trials into something that actually resembles the kind of multi-drone threat a ship might face in a real war. Lockheed Martin's own CEO, Jim Taiclet, confirmed this test publicly during a quarterly earnings call. And his exact words, as reported by Interesting Engineering, were that the company had used a shipboard laser system to knock an incoming drone right out of the sky. That's a defense company's chief executive on a public financial earnings call, confirming a live, combat-relevant test result to investors. That's not marketing spin. That's the kind of statement that gets fact-checked by financial analysts and defense journalists within hours if it isn't accurate. Now here's where the story moves from testing into an actual shooting war. According to reporting picked up across multiple outlets, the New York Post, and independently referenced by Gulf News, LiveMint, and GB News, according to Next Big Future's compiled tracking of the conflict, Helios has already engaged Iranian drones during Operation Epic Fury. This is being described as the first known combat deployment of a high-energy shipboard laser weapon in this entire war. Not a test, not a demonstration. An actual combat engagement using a directed energy weapon against real Iranian drones in a real war. I want to be completely straight with you about one important caveat here. because a serious breakdown doesn't oversell a weapon just because it sounds impressive. According to the original Defense News reporting, U.S. military officials have not publicly confirmed specific verified kill records for Helios during this current conflict. The combat engagement reports are sourced to people described as familiar with the operation, not to an official Pentagon confirmation with a released kill count. That distinction matters, and I'd rather tell you that honestly than pretend this is more confirmed than it actually is. What is confirmed, beyond dispute, is the testing record, the physical deployment into the combat theater, and the fact that multiple independent outlets are reporting the same underlying claim from different sourcing chains. Let's talk about why this weapon matters so much to Iran's specific strategy in this war, because this is where the real significance sits. According to the National Interests reporting, a standard Shahed-type drone, the exact kind Iran and its allies have used throughout this conflict, costs approximately $35,000 to build. Other reporting from Defense Talks puts that figure closer to $30,000. Either way, we're talking about a weapon that costs roughly the price of a mid-range car. Now compare that to what it costs to shoot one down using conventional defenses. According to Interesting Engineering, a single RIM 116 rolling airframe missile, one of the standard interceptors used against exactly this kind of threat, costs roughly $1 million. According to Defense Talks reporting, if a defender spends $1 million to intercept a $30,000 drone, the economic advantage sits entirely with the attacker, and repeating that exchange hundreds or thousands of times over the course of a war imposes enormous financial strain on an air defense network, no matter how wealthy the country operating it is, and that gap in spending is not small at either end. According to Yahoo News reporting, the entire American military budget sits around $900 billion, compared to Iran's total defense spending of roughly $23 billion in 2025. Washington's budget dwarfs Tehran's by a factor of nearly 40 to 1. And yet, according to that same reporting, simply having a bigger budget is not in itself a cost-effective way to fight a war built around cheap drone attrition. If every single engagement cost $1 million to stop a $30,000 threat, even a budget 40 times larger, eventually bleeds out if the volume of attacks is high enough and sustained long enough. This is precisely the imbalance that directed energy weapons are built to erase. According to Defense Talks reporting, the Helios system draws its power directly from the destroyer's own onboard generator, meaning the cost of firing a single laser shot is essentially just the cost of the electricity it takes to generate the beam, described in that reporting as potentially less than the daily electricity cost of a large apartment. Read that comparison again. Stopping an Iranian drone with this system can cost less than what it takes to run air conditioning and lights in a single apartment for one day. Compare that to $1 million missile, and you start to understand why defense analysts are calling this a genuine turning point rather than just an incremental upgrade. There's a broader pattern behind why the Navy pushed so hard to get this technology fielded in time for a war like this one. According to the National Interests reporting, Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb drone attack against Russia in June 2025 demonstrated exactly how devastating this cost imbalance can run in the opposite direction. A handful of small, cheap drones managed to destroy numerous Russian bomber aircraft that were far more expensive and far harder to replace. That single operation became a case study across military planning circles worldwide for how dangerous the drone cost asymmetry problem has become. And it's part of why the American military accelerated its own push toward directed energy defenses rather than continuing to rely purely on expensive interceptor missiles. Now, let's talk about the second system working alongside Helios in this war, because understanding both together tells you how seriously the Navy prepared for exactly this scenario. According to Interesting Engineering, other Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the fleet have received a related but lower-powered system called Odin, the optical-dazzling interdictor, Navy, which is intended mainly for disrupting the sensors and optical guidance systems that drones and precision weapons rely on to find their targets, rather than physically destroying the target outright the way Helios can. According to Army Recognition's separate analysis, imagery from February 28, 2026, the very first day of this entire war, showed a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer launching Tomahawk cruise missiles toward Iranian targets, with close examination of that same footage indicating one of the destroyers in that carrier-led task group was also fitted with Odin. Think about what that means. On day one of this war, before Helios had even been publicly confirmed as combat deployed, American destroyers were already carrying a layered directed energy capability, one system to blind incoming sensors, and eventually another to physically destroy the target outright, right alongside conventional cruise missile strikes. That's not a single experimental weapon quietly slipped into a corner of this conflict. That's a genuinely layered defensive architecture, present in the fleet from the opening night of the war. And this isn't where the story ends, because Congress is already pushing to scale this technology up dramatically. According to reporting from the war zone, The Navy's proposed budget for the next fiscal cycle includes a request for $75.6 million for a separate effort called the Joint Laser Weapon System, aimed at developing a containerized 150 kilowatt class laser, with additional work underway toward 300 and even 500 kilowatt class designs. Helios itself, according to that same reporting, is officially designated by the Navy as Mark V Mod 0 and currently sits at 60 kilowatts. If a system that powerful is already reportedly engaging drones in combat, the jump toward a system 2.5 to more than 8 times more powerful gives you a sense of where this entire category of weapon is heading in just the next few years. Let's be fair about the real limitations here too, because an honest breakdown doesn't oversell a weapon just because the numbers sound dramatic. Directed energy systems like Helios still depend on atmospheric conditions. Heavy fog, sandstorms, extreme heat, shimmer over open water can all degrade beam effectiveness to some degree. Current generation naval lasers also have shorter effective engagement ranges than a long-range missile intercept, and a single system on a single ship can only track and engage what's directly in its line of sight, one target at a time, rather than an entire incoming swarm simultaneously. Those constraints are real, and they're exactly why the Navy isn't replacing its missile-based defenses with lasers. It's layering this capability alongside conventional systems like the RAM-116 and the Mark 15 Phalanx close-in weapon system, which, according to interesting engineering, also has its own well-documented operational limits against fast, low, small targets. But even accounting honestly for those limitations, here's the strategic reality underneath everything we've just covered. Every single drone that Helios destroys for the cost of running a shipboard generator is one fewer expensive interceptor missile pulled out of a destroyer's limited magazine capacity. A magazine that cannot be reloaded at sea, only back at a friendly port, sometimes thousands of miles away. In a war that has already stretched past 13 consecutive nights of strikes and counter-strikes, magazine depth becomes just as important as raw firepower. A ship that runs out of interceptor missiles in the middle of a sustained drone barrage has a serious problem. A ship with a functioning laser, as long as its generator keeps running and its cooling systems keep working, does not face that same limitation in nearly the same way. Now let's connect this directly back to the broader war, because these systems aren't operating in a vacuum. Iran has spent years building a strategy specifically around cheap drone saturation, overwhelming defenders with volume, rather than trying to match American technology directly, according to Defense Talk's analysis of the underlying Iranian doctrine. That strategy has driven a huge share of the attacks we've covered throughout this entire conflict, against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, against American bases across the Gulf, against allied nations like Bahrain and Jordan. Every one of those attacks depends on the same basic assumption, that the defender eventually runs out of expensive ways to stop cheap drones before the attacker runs out of drones to launch. A functioning shipboard laser breaks that assumption at its foundation. It doesn't need to outlast Iran's drone production by matching missile for missile, because it was never trading missiles in the first place. It trades electricity. And electricity, generated by a ship's own onboard systems, running continuously as long as fuel and maintenance hold up, is a resource that doesn't run out the way a finite stockpile of million-dollar interceptors eventually does. So when you hear a headline like, "The US Navy launched something that shouldn't exist and Iran can't stop it," understand precisely what sits underneath that sentence, because none of it is empty hype. It's a directed energy weapon that took 8 years to go from a signed contract in 2018 to full shipboard integration in 2022, to a confirmed single target test in 2024, to a 444 multi-drone test described publicly by a defense company's own CEO, to what multiple independent outlets now describe as the first confirmed combat deployment of a high-energy shipboard laser in modern naval history, sitting right now off the coast of Iran, in exactly the theater where Iran's cheap drone strategy was supposed to work. That doesn't mean this single weapon system decides the outcome of this entire war. Wars this large, spanning multiple fronts across the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, Bahrain, Jordan, and deep inside Iranian territory itself, never turn on one piece of hardware alone, no matter how advanced it is. But it does mean something easy to overlook underneath all the louder headlines about airstrikes and collapsing ceasefires and oil prices spiking back above $100 a barrel. Somewhere in the quieter, less dramatic layer of this conflict, a technology 8 years in the making has finally reached the exact moment it was built for, and it's already reshaping the basic economics of a war that Tehran's own military planners built around the assumption that cheap drones would always beat expensive defenses. Here's what I genuinely watch for going forward. Watch whether the Pentagon eventually releases an official, verified kill count for Helios in this conflict, because right now that specific claim is sourced but not officially confirmed, and that distinction is worth holding on to rather than treating this as more settled than it currently is. Watch whether more than just the single USS Preble gets fitted with a fully integrated Helios system as this war continues, because that would tell you how much operational confidence the Navy actually has once real combat data starts coming back, rather than controlled test results alone. And watch Iran's own drone tactics in the weeks ahead, because if their launch patterns start shifting, different timing, different altitudes, attempts to overwhelm several targets simultaneously, rather than trickle attacks one at a time, that's often the clearest sign that commanders on the other side have already noticed something in their playbook has stopped working the way it used to. What do you think this actually means for the rest of this war? Does a quiet, low-profile system like this end up mattering more than most people expect once the history of this conflict gets written? Or is it just one more layer in a war that's ultimately going to be decided by everything else happening around it? The strikes, the diplomacy, the oil markets, the blockades? Drop your honest read on it below. Because with this war already well past 13 consecutive nights of active strikes, and a technology like this only just now reaching full combat deployment, I think the next few weeks are going to tell us a lot more than most people are currently expecting.